The excavator's steel teeth bit into concrete as Sarah watched 20 years of memories disappear. But when her neighbor, Karen, stumbled into the destruction zone, clutching a faded photograph and screaming, "You've destroyed everything," Sarah realized she hadn't just removed a pool, she'd shattered something far more precious. What Karen built in that empty space would haunt them both forever, turning a simple renovation into a neighborhood war that would expose buried secrets and force Sarah to confront a truth that would change everything she thought she knew about loss, love, and the price of moving on. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sarah Chen's backyard as she stood beside the excavator, coffee mug trembling in her hands. 23 years. That's how long the kidney-shaped pool had dominated her property, its once crystal waters now a murky green testament to 2 years of neglect since David's death. "You sure about this, Mrs. Chen?" Miguel, the contractor, adjusted his hard hat and gestured toward the pool. "It's a beautiful piece. Could clean up nice with some work." Sarah's jaw tightened. Beautiful. Everyone called it beautiful. They didn't see what she saw: David's empty lounge chair positioned at the exact angle to catch the morning light, the diving board where he'd performed his ridiculous cannonballs every Saturday, the shallow end where they'd planned to teach grandchildren to swim. Dreams that died with him in that hospital bed, leaving behind only chlorinated reminders of what would never be. "I'm sure." Her voice carried more conviction than she felt. "Tear it out." The excavator's engine roared to life, drowning out the suburban morning sounds of lawn mowers and barking dogs. Sarah watched as Miguel maneuvered the machine's arm over the pool's edge, steel teeth poised above the blue-tiled rim that David had insisted on installing himself despite her protests about hiring professionals. The first bite cracked through tile and concrete with a sound like breaking bones. Sarah, what are you doing?" The voice cut through the machinery's rumble like a blade. Sarah turned to see Karen Whitmore stumbling across the shared property line, her usually pristine appearance disheveled. Grey roots showed through her dyed blonde hair, and her silk blouse was wrinkled, as if she'd slept in it. "I'm renovating," Sarah called back, not bothering to hide her irritation. Karen had been increasingly intrusive since David's death, constantly dropping by with casseroles Sarah didn't want and advice she didn't ask for. "But the pool," Karen's voice cracked. "You can't just destroy it." Miguel paused the excavator, looking between the two women with the practiced wariness of a contractor who'd witnessed his share of neighborhood disputes. Sarah waved him to continue. "It's my property, Karen." Karen stepped closer, her face pale. "But Danny loved that pool. He spent every summer here when he was little. You can't just erase that." Danny, Karen's son who died in Afghanistan 8 years ago. Sarah's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "I know you have memories here, but I can't live with this anymore. Every day I see it, and every day I remember what we lost." The excavator bit deeper, pulling away chunks of concrete and rebar. Murky water splashed onto the surrounding deck. "You don't understand." Karen's voice rose to near hysteria. "This isn't just about memories. Danny," she pressed her hands to her mouth, eyes wide with something that looked like panic. "You have to stop this. Please." Something in Karen's desperation gave Sarah pause. They'd been neighbors for 15 years, their relationship cordial but never particularly close. Karen had always been the perfectly manicured suburbanite, every hair in place, every social interaction calculated for maximum pleasantness. This raw desperation was completely out of character. "Karen, what's really going on here?" But Karen had already turned away, phone pressed to her ear. Michael, you need to come home. Now. She's destroying everything." Sarah frowned. Michael was Karen's husband, a soft-spoken accountant who traveled frequently for work. She'd barely seen him since David's funeral. The excavator's arm swept another load of debris toward the growing pile. Suddenly, Karen lunged forward. "Stop! There's something." Miguel killed the engine abruptly as Karen stumbled into the destruction zone, her designer shoes slipping on wet concrete. She fell to her knees beside the pool's torn edge, hands frantically pouring through the rubble. "Karen, get back. It's not safe." Sarah rushed toward her neighbor, but Karen was already pulling something from the debris. A small, waterproof container, sealed tight against years of chlorinated water. Karen clutched it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. He left me a message. Danny left me a message before his last deployment, and I put it in the pool's filter housing for safekeeping. I've been coming here every day for 8 years, just to be close to his words. The container shook in Karen's trembling hands. Sarah stared, a cold understanding creeping through her chest. All those times she'd seen Karen in her garden, always positioned with a clear view of the pool. All those casual visits, the insistence on helping with pool maintenance when David was alive. You should have told me, Sarah said quietly. I couldn't. Karen's voice was barely a whisper. What if you said no? What if you moved away? Dana's words were the only thing keeping me sane, and now, she looked at the destruction around them. Now I don't even have the place where they were safe. Miguel cleared his throat uncomfortably. Ladies, I can work around whatever you need to figure out, but I've got another job this afternoon. Sarah looked at her destroyed pool, then at Karen's broken expression. The weight of her neighbor's 8-year secret settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She'd thought removing the pool would free her from painful memories. Instead, she'd apparently destroyed someone else's lifeline. What does the message say? Sarah asked. Karen's hand shook as she opened the container. Inside was a single letter, the paper yellowed but still intact. Her eyes moved across the words, and her face crumpled completely. He knew, she whispered. He knew he wasn't coming back. And he wrote me instructions. What kind of instructions? Karen looked up, her eyes now holding a strange, fierce light that made Sarah step back. How to build a memorial. How to honor him properly. How to make sure he's never forgotten. She stood slowly, still clutching the letter. He knew about your pool, Sarah. He knew about this exact spot. He said if something ever happened to him, this is where I should create his shrine. The word shrine hung in the air like a threat. Karen, this is still my property, not anymore. Karen's voice had changed, becoming eerily calm. Dana's letter is very specific. He researched property laws, easements, memorial rights. Did you know that in this state, a memorial established with the property owner's consent becomes legally protected? David gave his consent 8 years ago. Sarah's mouth fell open. What are you talking about? Karen smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. David knew about the letter, about Dana's plans. He agreed to let me build the memorial here when the time came. I have his signature, witnessed and notarized. She folded the letter carefully. You've just destroyed my son's chosen resting place. But don't worry, Sarah. I'm going to build it back exactly as he wanted. And thanks to this morning's destruction, I now have the perfect blank canvas. The excavator sat silent in the morning sun, its work half finished. Around them, the neighborhood continued its peaceful suburban rhythm, unaware that a 23-year friendship had just died along with Sarah's dreams of moving forward. Karen tucked the letter into her blouse and walked back toward her house. Her earlier hysteria replaced by a purposeful stride that chilled Sarah to the bone. Behind her, Miguel started the engine again, but Sarah held up her hand. Stop, she called out, her voice barely audible over the machine's rumble. Just stop. As the excavator fell silent, Sarah realized that removing the pool had been the easy part. What Karen was about to build in its place would be her real nightmare. 3 days later, Sarah stood at her kitchen window nursing her morning coffee and watching Karen direct a crew of workers with military precision. Where the pool had been, wooden stakes now marked out a perfect rectangle, connected by bright orange string that gleamed like a warning in the dawn light. Foundation work starts today, Karen had announced the previous evening, appearing at Sarah's door with a manila folder thick with documents. I thought you'd want to see the plans. The plans. Sarah had stared at the architectural drawings. In horror, a raised stone platform surrounded by carefully manicured gardens, featuring a central monument flanked by 2 reflecting pools. It looked less like a memorial and more like a temple. This is insane, Karen. You can't build this in my backyard. Our backyard, Karen had corrected smoothly. According to the easement David signed, 20 feet by 30 feet of perpetual memorial rights. She tapped the legal document with one perfectly manicured nail. I've already filed with the city. Permits are approved. Now, watching the construction crew unload equipment, Sarah felt the walls of her world closing in. She'd called her lawyer yesterday, only to be told that the documents appeared legitimate and would require weeks of investigation to challenge. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter Lisa in Portland. "Mom, I saw Karen's Facebook post about the memorial. What's going on?" Sarah's stomach dropped. She grabbed her laptop and navigated to Facebook, where Karen's post was already drawing dozens of comments and shares. The photos showed the pool destruction and featured a lengthy caption about honoring fallen heroes and community support for grieving families. "Some neighbors understand the sacrifice our military families make," Karen had written. "Others need to be reminded that freedom isn't free, and sometimes we must fight for the right to grieve properly." The comments were brutal. How could anyone destroy a memorial site? "My heart breaks for this Gold Star mother. Sarah Chen should be ashamed." Sarah's hand shook as she scrolled through the responses. Karen had painted her as the villain, the heartless neighbor who desecrated a sacred space. Within hours, the post had been shared in local community groups, military family networks, and neighborhood forums. A sharp knock interrupted her spiraling panic. Through the front window, she could see Michael Whitmore standing on her porch, his usually neat appearance disheveled. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his business suit was wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. Sarah opened the door cautiously. "Michael, I didn't know you were back in town. We need to talk." His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Away from Karen. She can't know I'm here." Sarah glanced toward the construction site, where Karen was deep in conversation with the foreman. "Come in. Quickly." Michael stepped inside, immediately moving away from the windows. Up close, Sarah could see he was trembling. She's lost her mind. Sarah. Completely lost it. "Do you know what she's spent on this project? $40,000. Money we don't have. Money we need for Emily's college tuition." Emily. Their daughter, a senior in high school. Sarah had barely seen her lately. "I tried to stop her," Michael continued, "but she has all the documentation. Power of attorney she convinced me to. Sign years ago for emergencies. She's liquidated our savings, taken out a home equity loan. All for this." He gestured toward the backyard. "Michael, what happened to Danny?" "Really?" Michael's face crumpled. "He didn't die in combat, Sarah. That's what Karen tells people, but it's not true. Danny died by suicide. In his barracks, 6 months after returning from deployment. PTSD, survivor's guilt, depression, the whole nightmare. Karen couldn't accept it. She created this entire story about him dying heroically in battle." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The memorial instructions. Danny never wrote any instructions. Karen created those too. She's been visiting your pool all these years because it reminded her of the summers when Danny was happy, before he enlisted. Before everything went wrong. Michael's voice broke. "I've tried to get her help, but she's convinced everyone that I'm the one with problems. Her grief support group thinks I'm in denial about Dana's heroic sacrifice." Outside, Karen's voice carried clearly through the window as she directed workers to dig deeper for the foundation posts. She sounded completely rational, completely in control. "The easement document," Sarah said. "Is it real?" Michael pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "I found David's original signature page in Karen's files. She used it to create the memorial agreement, but look at the date." He pointed to the top of the document. She dated it 3 years after David signed it. 3 years after he was already dead. Sarah stared at the evidence of Karen's forgery. "We have to stop this." "You don't understand." Michael grabbed her arm. "I tried to confront her last night. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing purple finger marks around his wrist. "She's not just grieving anymore, Sarah. She's dangerous. And if we expose her lies about Danny, she'll never forgive us. She'll never forgive Emily." The sound of heavy machinery starting up drew their attention back to the window. Karen was now wearing a hard hat, standing beside the excavator as it began digging the memorial's foundation. But something was wrong with the scene. The workers kept looking at each other uncertainly, and one was shaking his head. Sarah opened the window to hear better. We've hit something," the foreman was saying. "Looks like there might be utilities down here we weren't told about." Karen's voice carried a sharp edge. "There are no utilities. Keep digging." Regulations require us to stop when we encounter unexpected. I said keep digging. Karen's carefully maintained composure cracked. My son died for this country, and you're worried about some old pipes? Dig around them. One of the workers climbed out of the excavator. Lady, that's not a pipe. That's PVC with metal fittings. Could be gas, could be electrical. We are not risking it. Sarah watched Karen's face transform. The mask of bereaved dignity fell away, revealing something wild and desperate underneath. Fine, Karen snapped. Get off my property. All of you. It's not your property, the foreman replied. And we are not leaving equipment here without proper permits and safety clearances. Karen pulled out her phone. We'll see about that. I'm calling the city, the police, and my lawyer. You people have no idea who you're dealing with. Michael gripped Sarah's arm tighter. She's been making threats like that all week. Last night she told me she had evidence that would destroy anyone who tried to stop her. She said she'd been preparing for years. As Karen stalked toward her house, still shouting into her phone, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Sticking out of Karen's purse was a corner of what looked like a photograph. But not just any photograph, one she recognized. It was a picture of David, taken at their anniversary party 3 years ago. The same party where David had been drinking heavily, where he'd made that inappropriate comment to Karen's friend, where Sarah had spent the evening apologizing for his behavior. The same party where David had disappeared for 2 hours, claiming he needed air. The same party where Karen had left early, claiming a headache. Michael, Sarah whispered, what kind of evidence do you think Karen has? Before he could answer, Karen reappeared from her house, but she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man in a dark suit, tall, intimidating, with the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. That's her lawyer, Michael breathed. Richard Blackwood. He specializes in memorial law and veterans' rights. She's been meeting with him for months. Sarah watched as Blackwood surveyed the construction site, taking photos and measurements. Then he turned toward her house, his gaze finding her kitchen window with unsettling precision. He smiled and waved. He knows we are watching, Sarah said. They're coming over, Michael panicked. I can't be seen here. Karen thinks I'm in Chicago on business. As Michael slipped out the back door, Sarah saw Karen and Blackwood approaching her front porch. In Karen's hand was a thick folder, and her expression held the same fierce light Sarah had seen 3 days ago, the look of someone who believed they held all the cards. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by sharp knocking. Mrs. Chen. Blackwood's voice was smooth, professional. We need to discuss some irregularities in your property records. I think you'll find our findings very interesting. Through the peephole, Sarah could see Karen standing behind the lawyer, that photograph of David now clearly visible in her hand. But it wasn't just the photo that made Sarah's knees weak, it was what Karen had written across the bottom in red ink. I know what you did. Sarah's hand hovered over the door handle for a full 30 seconds before she finally opened it. Richard Blackwood's smile was predatory, all sharp teeth and cold calculation. Behind him, Karen looked like a different person entirely, gone. Was the hysterical neighbor from 3 days ago, replaced by someone radiating quiet menace. Mrs. Chen, thank you for agreeing to see us, Blackwood said, though Sarah hadn't agreed to anything. May we come in? We have some sensitive matters to discuss. I'd prefer to keep this brief, Sarah replied, not moving from the doorway. Karen stepped forward, the photograph still clutched in her manicured fingers. I think you'll want privacy for this conversation, Sarah. Unless you'd prefer the whole neighborhood to hear about David's extracurricular activities. The words hit like ice water. Sarah's vision blurred for a moment, but she stepped aside to let them enter. Whatever Karen thought she knew, Sarah couldn't risk it becoming public knowledge. They settled in her living room, Blackwood on the sofa and Karen in David's old recliner, a deliberate choice that made Sarah's skin crawl. Karen placed the photograph face down on the coffee table between them like a tarot card waiting to reveal fate. Let's dispense with pleasantries, Blackwood began, opening his briefcase. My client has made some disturbing discoveries about the circumstances surrounding her son's memorial site. It appears there may have been coercion involved in the original property agreements. What are you talking about? Sarah kept her voice steady, but her palms were sweating. Karen flipped the photograph over. It showed David at their anniversary party, but he wasn't alone. A woman was pressed against him in the hallway outside the bathroom, her face turned away from the camera but her body language unmistakable. David's hands were on her waist, his head bent toward her neck. "Recognize her." Karen's voice was silk over steel. Sarah stared at the image, her throat constricting. The woman's blonde hair, the familiar curve of her shoulder, the distinctive silver bracelet she always wore, it was definitely Karen. But that was impossible. Karen had left the party early. She'd had a headache. "You staged this," Sarah whispered. "Did I?" Karen tilted her head. "Or did your husband have a wandering eye and poor impulse control? I have 17 more photos from that night. Sarah, some much more explicit." Blackwood leaned forward. "Mrs. Chen, my client has been very patient. For 3 years, she's kept this information private out of respect for your grief. But your recent actions, destroying property with sentimental value, refusing to honor valid memorial agreements, have forced her hand." "Those agreements are forgeries," Sarah said, finding her voice. "David never signed anything giving you memorial rights." Karen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but he did sign something that night. After I took these photos. After. I explained how devastating they would be to you, to his reputation, to his memory. David was very cooperative when properly motivated." She pulled out another document, this one bearing David's signature in shaking handwriting that looked nothing like his usual confident scrawl. "A confession," Karen continued, detailing his inappropriate advances, his breach of neighborly trust, his deep remorse, and his agreement to provide memorial rights as compensation for his behavior. Sarah stared at the paper, recognizing David's handwriting but not understanding how any of this was possible. David had never mentioned Karen that way. He'd found her annoying, overly talkative, desperate for attention after Dana's death. But he'd never. "You're lying," Sarah said, but the word sounded hollow even to her. Blackwood pulled out his phone. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory. My client recorded the conversation that night." The audio quality was poor, clearly recorded from inside a purse or pocket, but David's voice was unmistakable. "Karen, please, this isn't. We can't. Sarah would never forgive me." "She doesn't have to know. Unless you force my hand." "What do you want?" "Insurance. Something that guarantees you'll be there for me when I need you. When Danny needs you." "Dana's been dead for 5 years. Danny will never be dead as long as I'm alive. And if you want to keep your perfect marriage intact, you'll help me make sure he's remembered properly." The recording continued, David's voice growing more desperate as Karen outlined her demands: access to their pool area, future memorial rights, and his silence about their encounter. Sarah's world tilted. The David in that recording sounded broken, terrified, nothing like the confident man she'd been married to for 25 years. But it was definitely his voice. "He was drunk," she said weakly. "Drunk men tell the truth," Karen replied. "And the truth is, your husband was willing to betray 25 years of marriage for 15 minutes of excitement. The only question is what you're willing to do to keep that truth buried." Blackwood closed his phone. "My client's demands are simple. She wants her memorial built according to the original agreement. In exchange, these materials remain private. Forever. And if I refuse..." Karen's smile was radiant and terrible. "Then tomorrow morning, copies of everything go to your daughter Lisa, your church, David's former colleagues, and every neighborhood social media group. I'll tell them how David took advantage of a grieving widow, how he manipulated me during my darkest hour, and how you're now trying to cover up his crimes by destroying evidence." The room fell silent except for the ticking of David's grandfather clock. Sarah stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the man she'd loved with the stranger in Karen's story. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have until noon. Tomorrow," Blackwood said, standing. "After that, the materials become public record as part of a harassment lawsuit." They moved toward the door, but Karen paused at the threshold. "Sarah, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about David's death, but he made his choice that night 3 years ago. Now you have to make yours." After they left, Sarah sat alone in her living room, staring at the photograph Karen had deliberately left behind. David's face was turned away from the camera, but his body language spoke of guilt and desperation. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Are you okay?" "I saw them leave." Sarah typed back, "Can you meet me tonight? After Karen goes to sleep? I need to know everything. Dangerous. She watches everything I do now. Please. This is about more than the memorial." A long pause, then, midnight. The old playground on Maple Street. Come alone. Sarah spent the rest of the day in a haze, mechanically, going through the motions of normal life while her world crumbled. Every memory of her marriage was now suspect. Every loving gesture from David could have been guilt. Every argument they'd had took on new meaning. At 11:45 p.m., she walked through the empty streets to Maple Playground, a forgotten patch of rusted swings and cracked pavement that the city had been promising to renovate for years. Michael was already there, sitting on a bench under a broken street light. "She's asleep," he said without preamble. "Sleeping pills. She's been taking them since this started." "Michael, I need to know about that night. The anniversary party. What really happened?" Michael was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Karen planned it. All of it. She'd been obsessing over David for months, ever since he helped her fix her fence after Danny died. She convinced herself that he was interested in her, that you didn't appreciate him. So she seduced him. She tried. But David wasn't interested. He was drunk, yes, but not stupid. He knew what she was doing. Michael looked up at her, his eyes hollow in the dim light. So she drugged him. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. What? Rohypnol. She'd been stealing it from her doctor's samples. She works part-time at a medical clinic, remember? David wasn't having an affair, Sarah. He was assaulted. And then she blackmailed him with photos that made it look consensual. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank onto the bench beside Michael, her mind reeling. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he report her? Because she was smart. She made sure there were witnesses who saw David drinking heavily, who heard him complaining about your marriage. She positioned herself as the grieving widow who was just being friendly. If he'd accused her, who would have believed him? You believe him. Michael nodded grimly. Because she tried the same thing with me 6 months later. Only I didn't drink enough, and I knew what to watch for. I found the drug in my system the next morning and confronted her. That's when she showed me what she had on David. Sarah stared into the darkness, pieces of a horrific puzzle falling into place. She's been planning this for years. The memorial, the blackmail, everything. David was going to go to the police the week before he died, Michael continued. He'd found a lawyer who specialized in male sexual assault cases. He was finally ready to fight back. The implication hung in the air like poison. Sarah's voice came out as a croak. You think she killed him? I think David had a heart attack at age 52 with no family history of heart disease, 3 days before he was supposed to meet with his lawyer. I think Karen works at a medical clinic with access to all kinds of drugs. And I think she spent the last 2 years setting you up to take the fall for destroying her memorial to cover up what she really did. In the distance, a siren wailed. Through the empty streets, Sarah looked up to see flashing lights heading toward their neighborhood. MI was absolute. Where Karen's memorial construction had been, only charred wooden stakes and melted orange string remained, scattered across Sarah's backyard like the bones of some prehistoric creature. The acrid smell of burned plastic and treated lumber hung in the air, mixing with the sweet scent of Karen's prized roses, which had been destroyed when firefighters trampled through her garden to access the water lines. Sarah stood beside Fire Chief Martinez as he wrapped up his preliminary report, his weathered face grim in the floodlight glare. Accelerant was definitely used, he said, making notes on his clipboard. Gasoline, from the smell. But here's the strange part. It was poured in a perfect circle around the construction materials, almost like someone was performing some kind of ritual. Any idea who might have done this? Sarah asked, though she was already dreading the answer. Martinez glanced toward Karen's house, where every light blazed and shadows moved behind her. Curtains. We'll need to interview everyone, but the owner of the memorial project is usually our first suspect in cases like this. Insurance fraud, attention-seeking, psychological break, we see it more than you'd think. Sarah's stomach churned. Karen wasn't seeking insurance money or attention. She was destroying evidence. Chief Martinez. A young firefighter approached, holding something in his gloved hands. We found this buried under the construction debris. Looks like it survived the fire. It was a metal lockbox, the kind used for important documents. The outside was scorched black, but the fireproof interior had protected its contents. Martinez opened it carefully, revealing a thick stack of papers, photographs, and what appeared to be several small glass vials. I'm going to need you to step back, Martinez said, but not before Sarah glimpsed the top photograph, another image of David, but this one showed him unconscious on Karen's living room couch, his shirt partially unbuttoned. The vials were labeled with medical terminology Sarah didn't recognize, but one word stood out: digitoxin. Her blood turned to ice. Digitoxin was a heart medication that, in the wrong doses, could trigger cardiac arrest. David had died of a heart attack. Chief, I think you need to see this. Another firefighter emerged from the smoke, carrying an evidence bag containing what looked like a small video camera. Found it mounted in the oak tree, pointed directly at the construction site. Still recording. Martinez's expression grew, increasingly serious as he examined the camera. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to need you to contact Detective Rodriguez from the police department. Tonight. This has moved beyond arson. As the fire crews packed up their equipment, Sarah noticed Michael, standing at his kitchen window, his face pale in the fluorescent light. Their eyes met across the dark yards, and he gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, a warning. Karen was watching too, but from her front door. Even at this distance, Sarah could see her neighbor's strange smile, the satisfied expression of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as intended. Mrs. Chen. Detective Rodriguez had arrived with surprising speed, a compact woman with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much human ugliness to be shocked by anything. I understand there may be more to this fire than simple arson. They spoke in Sarah's living room while crime scene technicians processed the backyard. Rodriguez listened without interruption as Sarah explained the memorial dispute, the blackmail attempt, and Michael's revelations about David's assault. These are serious accusations, Rodriguez said when Sarah finished. Sexual assault, extortion, possibly murder. But I have to ask, why didn't your husband report the assault when it happened? Sarah had been dreading this question. He was afraid no one would believe him. Karen positioned herself as the grieving widow, and David had been drinking. She made it look consensual. And you believe she may have killed him to prevent him from going to the police? I don't know what I believe anymore, but that lockbox contained digitoxin, and David died of a heart attack with no family history of heart disease. Rodriguez made careful notes. We'll have the contents of that box analyzed, and we'll need to exhume your husband's body for toxicology testing. In the meantime, I need you to stay away from Mrs. Whitmore. If she's as dangerous as you believe, confronting her could put you at risk. After Rodriguez left, Sarah sat in her dark kitchen, watching the crime scene lights sweep across her devastated backyard. Every few minutes, her phone buzzed with text messages from neighbors asking what had happened, sharing theories, expressing concern. The story was already spreading through the community like wildfire. At 3 a.m., her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Emily Whitmore, Karen's 17-year-old daughter. The girl was crying, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. She wore pajamas and flip-flops, as if she'd run from her house without stopping to dress properly. Sarah opened the door immediately. Emily, what's wrong? She killed him, Emily sobbed. She killed Danny, and she killed your husband, and now she's going to kill my dad. Sarah pulled the girl inside, checking the street for any sign of Karen. Slow down. Tell me what happened. Emily collapsed onto the sofa, her whole body shaking. I heard her on the phone tonight, after the fire. She was talking to someone about cleaning up loose ends and eliminating problems. She said Dad knew too much and couldn't be trusted anymore. Emily, are you sure? Sometimes grief can make people say things they don't mean. She's not grieving. Emily's voice cracked with hysteria. Danny didn't die in Afghanistan. He killed himself because of what she did to him. The things she made him do, the way she controlled every part of his life. She drove him crazy with her obsession, and when he finally tried to get help, She told everyone he was having PTSD episodes. Sarah felt the world shift again. What do you mean? What she made him do? Emily wiped her nose on her pajama sleeve. She made him pretend to be her boyfriend. When Dad was traveling, she'd make Danny sleep in her bed, hold her, tell her he loved her. She said it was therapeutic for her grief, but Danny told me it made him want to die. He said she was sick, that she couldn't tell the difference between being a mother and being a wife. The revelation was so horrific that Sarah couldn't process it immediately. Emily, that's incest. I know what it's called. Danny knew too. That's why he enlisted, to get away from her. But even in the military, she'd call him every day, send him packages, write letters about how much she missed her man. His commanding officer thought she was his girlfriend. Sarah stared at the girl, understanding dawning like a slow, sick sunrise. Karen hadn't been a grieving mother driven to madness by loss. She'd been an abuser whose victim had escaped the only way he could. When Danny died, she convinced everyone it was combat PTSD, Emily continued. But I found his suicide note. He wrote that he couldn't live with what she'd done to him, that he was sorry for being weak, that maybe death would finally make her stop. Where's the note now? She burned it, along with all his real letters, the ones where he begged her to get help, where he threatened to tell people if she didn't stop. She kept only the fake ones, the ones she wrote herself and signed, with his name. Emily looked up at Sarah with desperate eyes. She's planning something terrible for tomorrow. I heard her talking about the final memorial, about making sure everyone remembers Danny the right way. She's been collecting more drugs from a clinic, and she keeps talking about how some people don't deserve to live with the truth. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your back door. Heart pounding, Sarah moved to the kitchen window. In the crime scene lights, she could see a figure standing at her back door, tall, lean, wearing dark clothing. For a moment, she thought it might be one of the investigators, but then the figure turned toward the window. It was Karen, and she was holding something in her hands, something that glinted metallic in the artificial light. Emily, Sarah whispered. Call 911. Now. But Emily was no longer on the sofa. She stood by the front door, her expression completely changed. The tears were gone, replaced by the same cold satisfaction Sarah had seen on Karen's face earlier. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, Emily said, her voice now eerily calm. But Mom says some secrets are too dangerous to share. The front door opened, and Karen stepped inside, no longer bothering to hide the syringe in her hand. Hello, Sarah, she said pleasantly. I think it's time we finished our conversation. Behind Karen, Michael appeared in the doorway, but his hands were zip-tied behind his back and his mouth was covered with duct tape. His eyes were wide with terror above the silver binding. The whole family's here now, Karen continued, closing the door behind them. Perfect. I hate to leave anyone out of important discussions. Sarah backed toward the kitchen, but Emily moved to block her path. The girl's transformation was complete. Gone was the terrified teenager, replaced by someone who looked disturbingly like a younger version of Karen. You see, Karen said, advancing with the syringe held casually at her side. The fire tonight was meant to destroy evidence, but it seems some things survived that shouldn't have. Detective Rodriguez has been asking uncomfortable questions, and I can't have that. The police know about the lockbox, Sarah said. Killing me won't change that. Karen smiled. Oh, I'm not going to kill you, Sarah. You're going to kill yourself. Overcome with guilt, eh?